There are two variables that determine reality in this particular paradigm. And on the one hand, we have environment, and on the other hand, we have willpower. And the environment, the natural ecology, the temperature, the weather, the plants, the sounds, the natural environment around us, including all of the man-made parts of the environment, traffic, etc., are all having an influence. They're having a mental influence, an emotional impact, a physical impact, an intuitive impact, etc. So the environment around us is always having impact, and we are always having impact on our environment. And in most cases, there will be a tension between what we aspire to, what we want to be, who we want to be, and what the environment rewards us for being. And how the environment rewards us is by making it easy to go along with its flow. You can kind of see the environment as a river. And the environment is flowing downstream at 7.8 miles per hour. Let's just make it 7. So it's the current. And if you do absolutely nothing, you will relax into the current. It takes no effort. All you have to do is copy whatever anyone else does, and it's easy. You're going with the flow of the river. If you hang out around drug addicts who don't provide other alternatives, you got 10 or 12 drug addicts all talking about and raving about heroin, and no one really wants to do anything else. How about this? No, I want to do my heroin. How about this? No, I want to do my heroin. Try it, try it, try it. Well, that's the river. And the environment is neither positive or negative. It is what it is, and what it is in a given situation is positive or negative to where we want to be. So if I want to get addicted to heroin or to consume a lot of heroin, then one of the best things I can do is put myself in a river called an opium den or a heroin den, to put myself in the place where everyone's doing that. So if everyone's doing it, it's pretty easy to buy it. It's pretty easy to find whatever the utensils are. And nobody's going to say, what are you doing heroin here at a heroin den? No one's going to protest that. But if you try and bring in live music into a heroin den, they're going to protest that. If you try and bring in a philosophical conversation about good health, they're going to protest that. If you try and bring in healthy organic food and a gym, let's all do some exercise, that's going to be booed out of the heroin den because it's not going with the flow. So our ecology has an impact. The people we spend time with, the neighborhood we spend time in, the country we spend time in, the media that we spend time with, the sounds coming in from the neighbor, it all has impact. And the impact is that of rewarding what the norms are, what's going on, and punishing, starving energy from anything that diverges from the norm. Now, the net effect of a current, of an ecology, is a headwind, or a current, in this case 7 miles per hour. Now, if you're in this environment, you are going downstream at, surprise, surprise, 7 miles an hour. If you do absolutely nothing to deviate from the current to swim upstream, you'll be going in that direction, whatever that direction is, at 7 miles per hour. Now, if you get out on the shore, you get out of the stream and sit on the bank, you will be staying still. The river will be going in the direction that it's going. You will be sitting still. Now, if you walk upstream at 4 miles an hour, while the river goes downstream at 7 miles an hour, you will diverge from those in the river at a rate of 11 miles per hour. For every hour that you walk, and every hour that those in the river go downstream, you're diverging, you're separating. If your friend is in the river and you're walking upstream at 4 miles an hour, every hour is going to bring you 11 miles farther apart. If you're walking downstream at 4 miles an hour and your best friend in the river is swimming downstream at 7 miles an hour, you will be separating at 3 miles per hour. And this is all pretty basic, but willpower is what we use to either swim downstream or swim upstream or get out of the river or walk up the river and walk down the river. And it's a very important analogy because if you're in the river and you decide to swim upstream, and let's say that you can swim at about 2 miles an hour. So here you are, going 2 miles an hour. And I'm sure you could go faster for, 100 meters, but we're talking about miles here. And so, many people can't even swim for a mile. And this is a good analogy for willpower. You could dive in and go along for, gosh, we're getting it, right? But, the average person is already getting a little tired at this point. The river's going constant. It's not getting tired. Going upstream, the average person is getting tired. And so maybe you do your first 30 meters or whatever relatively fast, maybe at 5 or 6 miles per hour, and you're already a bit tired. The river's still going downstream at 7 miles per hour. And let's say I need a break, right? You need a break. Catch your breath. You're in the river. So when you were swimming upstream at 4 miles an hour, the river had a net effect because you're swimming at 4 miles per hour, but the river is flowing at 7 miles an hour. You're still going downstream at 3 miles per hour relative to the bank. And once you rest in the current, take a rest, you're now going downstream at 7 miles an hour. And this points to the reason that whenever you create a conflict between a large ecological force, whether it's your cult, your culture, whether it's a river, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a sandstorm, whether it's a bulldozer, whatever it is, if there's a chronic large force that's pushing this way, pushing for conformity, pushing to go downstream, you can jump in the river, and many people do. They arrive in an organization, they arrive in a relationship, they arrive in a cult, in a country, they arrive in a neighborhood, and they say, oh, wouldn't it be nice if everyone would just mow their lawns and weed the gardens? So let's get out and do that, and maybe can talk about that, maybe offer some help, to the neighbors. Let's get this neighborhood nice, like my last neighborhood, where everyone kept things nice. But after being scowled at and ostracized and not invited to the Friday party, and the weeding you volunteered to do just grows back, that's your sprint of willpower. And usually what happens when you have a dynamic of a pinball and a bowling ball, so you've got the bowling ball and the pinball. The bowling ball is 100 times bigger than the pinball, and they're going in opposite directions, so they're going to collide. And the law of mass dictates that when they do collide, the pinball is scattered. The bowling ball continues on its original trajectory. And so it goes. Every time a pinball collides with a bowling ball, it's similar to willpower combining or colliding with the cult, with the environment. When you get into a flow of a cult, a country, a work environment, a relationship, you're going to be rewarded for going this way. And your willpower only lasts for a little bit of time. It gives you a short burst to go against the current. Then you get tired. Willpower exhausts relatively rapidly, certainly far more rapidly than a river exhausts. And then you swim downstream. And so this is incredibly important to understand if you actually want to get upstream. If you do not want to be a heroin addict, if you do not want to end up poor, if you do not want to end up depressed, miserable, lonely, and your cult is producing a lot of depressed, miserable, lonely people, that's what's going downstream. If you don't want a divorce and your cult is producing a lot of divorce, if you don't want to lose all your money and 99% of the people who place 100 bets in the casino lose all their money, well then you've got to get out of the river. You can't fight the current. Now, this is why, first of all, measuring the current and its impact is very important, because every environment rewards you for thinking a certain way, talking a certain way, behaving a certain way, being a certain way, your haircut, your appearance, and all of that, and feeling a certain way. If you fit into that norm, you are rewarded. You're one of us. You get our flow and protection. If you do not, then the river is going to be pounding against your body as you try and walk or crawl or swim upstream or get out of the river. Now, if you understand the purpose of willpower, it's not to make headway swimming upstream. That's an abuse of the duration of willpower. Willpower gives you short bursts to make changes in your relationship with things, to make changes in where you live, to make decisions. You can make a decision and do a burst with willpower. And then willpower is tired. You can jump into the stream and swim fast. You can jump into, a race and sprint fast. But you can't put in a full burst for very long. Most people can't exert more than maybe an hour or so of willpower a day, to do something really different. And yet the environment is constantly pulling you downstream. So if you determine the pace at which your environment is eroding what it is that you desire, for example, enthusiasm, it's a beautiful energy. If you notice that you're less enthusiastic this year than you were the year before, and you are less enthusiastic the year before than you were the year before that, then you can measure the erosion of enthusiasm. You can say, how much enthusiasm am I losing on a yearly basis? And it's a good metric to check in on, because enthuse is, along with enthuse is to be filled with the divine. If you're highly enthusiastic in a felt and integrated way, you're filled with source energy, with the divine, the Greek etymology of the word. So, enthuse. So, if that's being taken away from you, if your creativity, I was more creative 5 years ago, now I'm more depressed. By how much? Okay, I'm 50% less creative today than I was 5 years ago. I'm 60% more depressed. Okay, and that's 5 years? Okay. So that looks like what? 10 to 15% per year is what you're going downstream. And then you're making an effort. You want to be excited about life. You want to move this and that. But the current is going faster than you are. Each year, you're miles and miles downstream. Now, this is where the analogy gets useful. If you use willpower to get out of the river that's flowing, you use intelligence and analysis to decide where you want to be. And then you use intelligence and analysis to look at where the river of your cult is flowing. Your country as a whole, your neighborhood. This is where the cult is going. But this is where I want to go. You got to get out of the river. Once you're out of the river, you can then walk upstream. And you can understand that you're not going to go as fast as those that are flowing downstream. You're going in a better direction, though, so it's okay. I mean, if you want to not be an opium addict, and your group is slowly losing themselves to opium addiction, well, then, it may be harder because, first of all, we're social creatures. And when you pivot away from something, you have to have the strength and the independence to leave the group. If you don't have the strength and independence to leave the group, you will adopt the memes of the group, however destructive, however mediocre, however divergent from your innate impulse. What brings you joy takes you upstream. But what brings integration with your cult takes you downstream, and you don't have the reserves of confidence, of competence. So this is one of the reasons it's important to get really good at something, and then find a way of bringing that talent into the world that creates independence, that creates freedom of time, freedom of money. Not by pretending time and money don't exist, but by learning time discernment and time organization to create more time. And by learning money creation and money investing to create more time and money, to pass through them rather than avoid them, to master time and money rather than letting them remain as our masters because we don't develop the competence to develop them. So getting out of the river and walking upstream and measuring progress towards the goal up here, we can then see with willpower, how long will it take us to get to where we want to get? Do we have the reserves and resources necessary to do so? Do we know how to do so? And this is an intelligent utilization of willpower, because if you stay in a relationship where your partner rewards you every single hour if you don't talk, but punishes you, ignores you, interrupts you, tells you your ideas are full of shit, blah, 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 punishes you if you do talk, rewards you, smiles, that's a good boy, whatever. If you don't talk, punishes you if you do talk. If that's the partner you've chosen, that's the river you've chosen. And that river is taking you downstream at a certain rate per hour. And you may have an idea from time to time. You go off and spend some time with your friends and you have great conversations and you think, you know what? I'm going to introduce words into my marriage. But if your partner punishes you every single time that you do so and rewards you every time that you do not, you will eventually conform, because willpower is for short bursts, but the environment is chronic, it's continuous. It never gets tired. It's self-sustaining. So in summary, figure out the environments you're in. What rivers do you belong to? What's the river at work? What does it reward? What does it bring out in you? What's the river at work? What's the river at home? What does it reward? What does it punish? So that'll reveal a lot about how you got to be here and how everyone else in the river got to be there. But that's just a little piece. Once you know where you are and why you're sweeping in that direction, you can look at the speed. At which speed? If I continue staying here, that's one reason people break up. They say, you know, in another 3 or 4 years, I'm not going to have the will. I'm not going to even remember what it was like outside this relationship. I'm not going to have the courage and will to leave, so I've got to do it now. I'll be too far downstream. And the thought of walking thousands of miles all the way back, just too hard. And so what willpower is useful for is analyzing, deciding which rivers to be in and out, because that's the good news. There's more than one river. There's a river flowing downstream here, but over here there's a river flowing upstream on the other side of the ridge. It's downstream for that river. It's going, this river is flowing west, this river is flowing east. There are roads that are going in the opposite direction of the river. There are more than one river. So an intelligent use of will is to get out of whatever river is taking you downstream, the place you don't want to go. And then to see if you can find a ride, a lift, another river, a boat, whatever, a plane that's going where you want to go. You want to find a flow that if you do absolutely nothing, you'll move along with the cult and end up closer to the goal. That's what you want. Now, there's one other variable here, because in a battle between cult, environment, and individual ego, the cult always wins eventually. You may have been so friendly when you first arrived in this country and smiled at people and said hello. But after 90% of those people didn't smile back, didn't say hello, ignored you, and some looked at you as if you were inferior for smiling and saying hello, you learn to look down, look straight ahead, not smile, and not say hello. How long it takes you to do that is how long it takes you to conform to the river. Now, the most powerful technology in the world is designing a self-sustaining river and then immersing yourself in that river. The most powerful thing you can possibly do with willpower is to create a series of flows, series of waterfalls that all end up in this place and begin a river in the exact place you want to go. And then lay down in the river. Relax in the flow of the routine, of the expectations, of the cult protocols, of the communication dynamics that bring you closer to the person that you want to be. This is an intelligent use of will. Create a river. And for myself personally, having observed the parts of me living in the San Francisco Bay Area that die, one thing I do is go to Thailand. Because if I spend 3 months of the year in Thailand, see, Thailand has a river that goes this way at 11 miles an hour. And the US has a river that goes this way at 3 miles an hour. So if I do nothing in the US, I will be thousands of miles, 3 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour, 24 hours a day, 24 hours a day. Things will erode slowly. But 3 months of the year with 11, we have, we have 33, and then we have 9 times 3, 27. If I spend 3 months in Thailand with its stronger current, and then 9 months in the US with its weaker current, I will be slightly ahead of, in terms of wanting to end up over here. The net effect will be I'll be a few miles in closer to where I want to be at the end of the year. However, if I spend 1 month a year in Thailand at 11 versus 11 months at 3, now I'm going backwards a certain number of miles every single year. So this pace is an incredibly important thing to understand, because your willpower can speed things up just a little bit, but not much. Now, there's one thing that is a little bit of a break to this rule, because typically it would just be the equation. You'd take 11 minus 3 equals 8 would be the net, negative, right? So after contributing 3 and going against an 11 mile an hour current, After an hour, you'd be 8 miles behind. However, this is within the personal ego and personal energy structure, because a lot of these pressures are psychological. They're not physical. You're not in a tug of war. Obviously, if you were, if you've got your whole neighborhood tugging in a tug of war this way, so let's say there's 300 of them, and then you're alone trying to go in the opposite direction of the neighborhood, tugging in the other way. Well, 300 against one person, it's perfectly easy to understand that you will get absolutely exhausted and still be dragged in the direction of the neighbors. But if you instead bring in an outer energy, so this is within a closed system, 11 minus 3 equals 8, that's a closed system. However, we are not actually in a closed system. Our framework, our paradigm may lead us to believe that we are, but we're actually not in a closed system. So if we inject energy from source, goddess, God, the universe, outside people. So any of these things, outside people, anything outside the neighborhood in this particular analogy can influx. So you might have a really supportive friend in a different state who called up and say, don't let those neighbors do that. I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. Well, that's then giving you 70% more psychological support. So maybe your number now feels more like a 4 rather than a 3. So then you don't lose 8, you lose 7. And then you might watch some media that agrees, oh, there's a whole country that thinks just like I do. Denmark's already doing these things, and they're happier people. That's validation. So even though there's 300 neighbors that want to go this way, I have a whole country outside the system that agrees with this approach. The data lines up. These people are happier people. They're more intelligent for doing it the way that only one person in this neighborhood thinks is a good idea. So you can bring outside influence. You can also, whether it's prayer or meditation or energy infusion, you can let in more energy than your personality would normally sustain. And you could call this a higher power, that kind of thing. The point is, in any dynamic where there's one against many, that dynamic of one against many is only within the confines of time, space, and that event. But in the larger scale of things, you can bring in the truths and insights of a great writer to bring you up to a 9 so that you've got more confidence than all of the other people. So now you're only 11 minus 9, now you're only losing head weight by 2. So if you're in an environment that isn't working for you, try to get out of it in order to create and enter an environment that is supporting you in being the person you want to be. Now, this is not always, meaning we have to be smart about where we want to go. That's, an entirely, different subject. If you're dating someone who every year they figure out a new way to start a new company to make lots of money and lose money and go deeper into debt, and they've been doing that they've done it 5 years in a row, and they're not changing the pattern, they're not learning from the pattern, they're just repeating it, then obviously they may be looking for a supportive audience who will say, oh, what a great idea. Let's give you all of our savings and cheer you on as you make billions of dollars. But if that's, and obviously many entrepreneurs and, startups would like that. And maybe if you're wanting to start something again, you would like that. It's not necessarily a good idea to pick up town and move again and find a new group of people who will support you in doing what doesn't work. So there's, this principle is true whether you know what you're doing or not, whether you want to go in an intelligent direction or not. If you think taking up smoking is going to bring about a nirvanic state and everyone around you is anti-smoking, well, then you've got to get out of these health-conscious people and go find an area where everyone's smoking. You could be wrong, though, and you will suddenly be rewarded and handed free cigarettes and pass a light, and there'll be the whole dynamic. It's just you've got to be smart enough to figure out if the river you took yourself out of and the river you put yourself into is actually a river that, statistically speaking, is going to lead to more sustainable well-being over time. And this principle doesn't get into that. It just points out that environment in the long term is always more powerful than willpower. And so if you don't like where you're going long term, change the environment. Don't try to fight the environment with your will.